The following program was pre-recorded. This is an abc13 Community Close-Up. Crossroads with Melanie Lawson.
And coming up today on Crossroads, a new book about the Obama White House is stirring controversy. Is First Lady Michelle Obama, quote, an angry black woman? Also, the spirit of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. lives on as youngsters test their oratorical skills in a competitive war of words. And we'll meet Miss Black Texas USA and Miss Black Teen Texas USA, both with strong Houston ties. That's all ahead on Crossroads. But good morning to you. I'm Melanie Lawson. We want to begin with a new book, The Obamas, by New York Times reporter Jodi Kantor. It's been getting a lot of press. And First Lady Michelle Obama is portrayed as a no-nonsense power player in her husband's administration, someone who often clashed with the president's top advisors. And while Mrs. Obama says she has not read the book and probably won't, she stated in a recent interview that she doesn't particularly like being portrayed as some angry black woman. She says that's a title that's been given to her since the campaign. Well, this notion of the angry black woman certainly sent shivers through African-American women all across the nation who say they are often characterized that way unfairly as mouthy, hostile, unreasonable, and ready to take on men at every turn. Joining us to talk about this hot-button issue, three very strong women: Alexis Jones, a publicist and author; Crystal Washington, a marketing and social media consultant; and Mia Wright, who is co-pastor of the Fountain of Praise Church. And I want to welcome all of you ladies here today. I appreciate having you here. So let's dive right in. This whole notion of the angry black woman, I'm sure you've been hearing this conversation out there. How did you feel about some of the characterizations that were made of Michelle Obama?
Well, I thought it was very disappointing to hear that a very strong, powerful woman who has such a presence for the first time in our lives, or in the history of the United States, we see a black woman have an influence in the White House, who has a great background. She's an attorney, very successful, and she's taken a step back from her professional career in order to lead with her family. And then they take those things, turn it around, and portray her in such a negative way. It's very disappointing to hear that, and I think it's something that follows along with a lot of black women as we have gone through life, whether we're in corporate, in church. There's always this portrayal of us as being angry.
Yeah, and of course the real criticism is that she had a great deal to do with clashing with some of his top advisors in the White House, and may indeed have been responsible for a couple of them leaving a little bit earlier than expected. But do you think that perhaps she's just being portrayed the same way as most first ladies? And we've heard over and over again the criticism that, we elected him, we didn't elect you.
Well, I think that's definitely a possibility. I do think she's a little different than some of our other first ladies in that she is a little bit more assertive. She has a little bit more of a different background than some of them do. So I think it's a possibility, but I do think when it comes to strong women, period, this will be an issue. If you're outspoken, it's going to be an issue.
Yeah, even though she has claimed all along, listen, my only role is really to be the first mother of the country, and not even so much just the first lady. And she's focused on sort of family issues. Do you think that maybe there was just a little bit more sensitivity there because of this issue?
Yes, I think there was a little bit more sensitivity because of this issue, because being that, that she is a mother, she's a wife, she's a first lady. A lot of people are, being that she's the first African-American woman that's the first lady, I think some people might be just a little intimidated by that.
And do you think that's the real issue here, that there is some racial component to all of this?
It's definitely a racial component, and it's sad to say, but, in America, that is still a issue that we're dealing with here in America.
Yeah, and do you ladies agree with that there is some racial component to this?
Well, I think there's a racial component, but I think this is more of a gender issue. I think we've been socialized to believe that men can be assertive, and it doesn't necessarily, they're not labeled angry or aggressive. But when women do some of those same actions and they stand their ground, well, sometimes they're made out to be angry or a bee or, all these other things. Yeah. So I think it's more of a gender issue than a racial issue.
And Pastor, I've got to ask you about that. Yeah,
I almost kind of slightly disagree. I think that when our counterparts who are women but not African American women, when they go through periods of anger or they're upset about something and they announce something, they are categorized a different way. They're used explicatives to name them and classify them. But when we, as African American women, raise our voice, or because we are upset about something, or because we want to be heard, they want to categorize us as being angry. And it's very different. You know, we're expressive people, and we've always been that way. But when we do express ourselves, sometimes it's taken culturally a different way. And so when I think that First Lady Michelle is dealing with the fact that she's an assertive woman, she's an outspoken woman, she's a successful woman, and she has a voice. And yet people have wanted to quiet that voice, even though at this point she's lent her voice to some very family-oriented and needful things within the country, such as children's obesity and a lot of other programs.
So you think it's different from, say, a Hillary Clinton or from, Nancy Reagan, who was also perceived as perhaps being very involved in her husband's administration?
Yeah, so definitely. I really think that a lot of the whole angry black women comes from how the media has portrayed an African American woman, especially all the way starting back from the 1950s with the whole Mammy up until now, even with the Tyler Perry films with Medea. And so with that being said, I just think that the media just it's something that sells, and people when they see a Nene Leakes, on Real Housewives of Atlanta, they assume that that's how an African-American woman acts, and so we just become limited.
We've only got a few seconds, and I want to ask you, Pastor, you are a co-pastor at your husband's church. Is this something you sometimes hear, that as the woman, we called him to the pulpit, but we don't necessarily want to hear from you all the time?
Absolutely. It's interesting because you can have two very successful, strong, vision-oriented and driven people serving in a similar capacity, and yet the one person is to lead, the second person leads from behind or from a second chair. In many ways, you have a lot of influence, and I'm sure that's where Michelle's influence comes in with her husband as a first lady. She has a voice of her husband. He hears her, and so a lot of times people don't want to accept that leadership or that influence that comes along with it. But it's very true. You do have that influence.
All right. Well, I'm going to give you the last word, and I thank all of you.
Thank you.
I'm sure this is a conversation that will continue at the beauty shop and at the churches and every place else. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, still to come, our leaders of the future let their words do the talking in honor of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
Let us remember that Dr. King courageously sacrificed his life to give his fellow brothers and sisters a sense of hope.
We're going to meet the winner of this year's MLK Oratory Competition when Crossroads continues.